Once again, I'd like to welcome everyone to this month's Wildlife for Lunch webinar. Today's webinar is on the importance of record keeping and wildlife management valuation. It's presented by Shane Kiefer, Plateau Land and Wildlife Management. Today's webinar is made possible through funding provided by the San Antonio Livestock Exposition Incorporated, and it's hosted by the Texas Wildlife Association and Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. With that, Shane, pass the controls over to you, and you should be good to go.
Thank you, Clint. Appreciate it. Appreciate everybody being here today to talk about record keeping and wildlife management evaluation. Always happy to help with these webinars and proud to be a part of the work TWA and AgriLife are doing. So thanks again and to y'all, and thanks to everybody for joining us. Clint already introduced me, so we'll skip that. But I always like to start with a little explanation of why I've got the honor of talking to you folks. Plateau's been around this is our 20th year. Been around a long time. I've been with Plateau for about 13 years. And what we do every day is work with private landowners on wildlife management tax valuation and open space valuation, ag and timber valuations as well. So it's what we do every day. We've seen just about a little bit of everything. I've been working with appraisal districts for 20 years, so we've got a pretty good sense of how these things work. So hopefully I'll give you some useful information today. I'm happy to certainly answer any questions that you may have at the end of it. So we'll jump right in. Brief overview. If you're here, if you're in wildlife management, I think this is going to be helpful for making sure you're doing a good job of keeping records. If you're thinking about wildlife management, this should give you an idea of what kinds of records you want to keep. I do want to point out that records are important whether you're in wildlife, whether you're in ag or timber. Those records are your evidence, your proof that you've earned that special tax valuation. And it's quite a benefit to a property owner, something guaranteed by the Constitution. And so it's important to be able to prove that you deserve it and deserve to keep it. So records are important regardless of what kind of open space you're in. We're going to focus obviously on wildlife today, which has some special requirements just because of the nature of it. Excuse me. Wildlife really is activity-based. The law requires that you do at least 3 activities every year, and you need to be able to show that you've been active in doing those things. Success is not a requirement. There's nothing in the law or the rules that requires you to be successful. Of course, you want to be. We want our landowners to be successful, but it's really about showing that you've done the activities. It's not meant to be more difficult or more expensive than other forms of agriculture. It's just a little different. It's a different option, a different type of agricultural use. And you want to think about it from the appraiser's standpoint. The appraiser's job gets a little harder. He can't drive by or she can't drive by at 70 miles an hour and see that you've got cows or crops. It's hard to see wildlife management activities driving by on the county road or the farm to market road. So their job's a little more difficult, and the easier you make the appraiser's job, in our experience, the less issues you're apt to have. And you can make it easier by following your plan and keeping good records of what you're doing in regards to your plan. I mentioned 3 to 7 practices at the minimum. That's what the law requires. That's all you're required to do. But we always recommend that you do a little bit more. We usually suggest people try to find at least 5 things they can do, put in their plan and do reliably year after year. That gives you a little insurance in case you don't get to something one year or equipment breaks down and you can't do an activity one year. That gives you that insurance. So always try to do more, but all you're really required to do is 3 out of 7. And we'll talk about the practices and what kinds of records you want to keep for some examples. You want to be able to prove that you've met the intensity requirements. So those practices, each of them has a certain intensity you've got to meet. Just like if you're grazing livestock, you've got to have a certain number of animal units to meet the intensity for your county. Same thing with wildlife, except these intensity levels are set by Parks and Wildlife in their guidelines. So those guidelines are set for each ecoregion. So depending on what part of the state in, your intensity requirements are going to vary, and that's all stuff that'll should be in your plan. But you want to make sure you're meeting those intensity requirements. How much acreage you need to cover each year for an activity, how many of something, how many feeders you need to have or nest boxes, how often you need to be doing something. That's all important because the intensity is what makes it qualify. It's important to remember that the activities most of them are annual activities. So you want to know what year you did something. Work that you did in one year may not count for the next year unless you're doing it again. So brush management's a good example because brush management can be expensive or labor intensive. So you may do a whole lot in one year, but it's only going to qualify for that year. If you want to keep it qualifying, you need to do additional acreage the next year. So brush management you do in 2016 doesn't count for 2017. There are some activities that qualify for longer times, 10-year activities. These are typically bigger projects, erosion control projects, and water activities, which don't necessarily have to be big projects, but providing supplemental water is usually a 10-year activity. So you get multiple years of credit and don't necessarily have to repeat that activity year after year. And we'll talk about those as well. The point of the records are to show that you've been active. Again, it's activity-based. You want to be able to demonstrate that you've been doing something and following your plan as closely as you can as it's written. Doesn't mean you can't be flexible with your plan. Your plan should be flexible, but you want to be able to demonstrate that you're doing what you told them you were going to do. That's how you show them that you deserve to keep that special valuation. So your property tax valuation depends on keeping good records, or it may at least. There are certainly appraisal districts that are pretty relaxed about record keeping. There are appraisal districts that are pretty strict about record keeping. It really varies quite a bit from county to county, from appraisal district to appraisal district. And so you need to understand what your appraisal district expects so that you can keep records accordingly. We encourage everybody to keep good records so you don't have to worry about it, because we've seen appraisal districts go from really relaxed one year to a new chief appraiser the next year or a new ag appraiser the next year, and all of a sudden they want to see some records. They start paying a little more attention. And they've got the right to ask. So you want to, if you've got those records, if you've been doing a good job, it won't matter who's in the office there. You'll be able to demonstrate that you've been doing what you're supposed to do. And it can be hard to catch up. It can be really hard to go back if all of a sudden they're asking for last year's activities or 2 or 3 years back. It can be hard to catch up if you haven't been keeping good records. It's hard to remember all that stuff. And that's true not just with compliance, but also with your management goals. If you've got something that's a 5 or 5 year or longer project, keeping records will let you know if you're making any progress. So record keeping is important from both aspects, keeping the appraisal district happy and also keep it on track with your management goals. Your records may be all the appraisal district ever sees. They don't have the time or the resources to come out and visit every property in ag or in wildlife, and so having good records, in particular, the better your records, in some cases, the less likely they are to ever want to come out. If they can see from your records that you've been doing what you need to do, they may never visit you. They won't have to worry about you. They're going to focus on folks that haven't been keeping good records and paying more attention to them. So you want to paint them a good picture of your activities and of your property. We do see more and more appraisal districts requesting annual reports, either with letters each year or simply expecting them as part of annual reporting, part of keeping the wildlife valuation. So that's a growing thing, has been growing for several years now. That doesn't have to be something that's problematic for you. Again, if you're keeping good records already, you won't have to worry about it if your appraisal district starts to ask for annual reports. If you own property, you probably are aware of the kinds of savings you get from having open space valuation. It is quite an incentive for landowners to keep their property in an open space setting, in agriculture or in wildlife or in timber. This is a real example from Hays County, and granted, Hays County's got pretty high property tax values. Sorry, pretty high property values. and pretty high tax rates too, actually. But this is true. The savings are substantial anywhere in the state. The higher your market value of your property, the more savings you get from open space, because those open space values don't vary a whole lot across the state. They do some, but not a whole lot. The savings are substantial. And in this case, you're looking at $9,500 a year in tax savings. That's worth some record keeping. If you could save almost $10,000 on your income taxes by keeping some extra records, you probably would do it. Same thing here. Keep those records. That's protecting those savings that you're earning. So what do appraisal districts expect? Again, that varies a lot from appraisal district to appraisal district. Some of them request annual reports each year, and that's all. They don't do inspections. They just want to see that you're doing it, and they'll leave you alone. You may never hear from them. Some only request annual reports occasionally, or maybe on a 3-year cycle. Some appraisal districts like to come out and visit properties. I don't know any appraisal districts that visit properties every year. They just don't have the resources to do that. But some that do like to visit properties may do them on a cycle. Hayes Appraisal District does it on a 3-year cycle. There's some other appraisal districts that use that 3-year cycle too. So, every 3rd or 4th year they're going to come out and visit and just confirm what you've been telling them in the reports. That's a good time to show them on the ground. But you still want to have that documentation in hand, so they don't have to wonder if you've been doing things in the meantime. You definitely want to keep your plan current and up to date. You need to submit a plan, an updated plan, an updated application. Anytime there's a change in ownership on your property, if you move it into a family limited partnership or into a trust or something like that, certainly if you sell it, the new owner would need to do that. But you're going to have to do it then. If there's a change in acreage, you buy or sell parts of your property, you want to update your plan, your application, or if you make big changes in the type of use. So if you're going from managing primarily for white-tailed deer in a hunting operation to more of a non-game management, and that's going to change a lot of your activities, that's when you want to update that plan. We recommend folks update their plan every 5 years, regardless, just to gives them a chance to reevaluate and lets the appraisal district know that you're paying attention, you're still doing what you said you were going to do. And an appraisal district can ask for an updated plan at any time. It may be 10 years, and they may realize they haven't gotten a plan from you for 10 years, and they may ask you for an updated plan and documentation. So if you're keeping it up to date before they ask, then again, you won't have to worry about whether they're going to be sending you a letter or not. Now, there's some things that make record keeping easier. That plan that I keep talking about, it's good to have a well-developed plan. It tells you what you're supposed to be doing, how you're going to do it, and lets the appraisal district know that you know what you're doing, so they don't have to question whether you're doing things according to the rules. So having a good plan is the first step, and if a really good plan is going to tell you what types of, not just what types of activities, but how much and when to do them, those sorts of things. A GPS is a great tool. They're inexpensive now. If you've got a smartphone, you've probably got a GPS in your pocket already. Most smartphones have GPS in them. There are apps you can download that make it work just like a handheld GPS. It's good to have. It's not essential, but it is useful, especially if you ever want to have any of your things mapped. Put on a map. You can oftentimes take that information, put it into Google Earth as well, and make some basic maps for your own. But GPS is a good tool to have. And again, if you've got a smartphone, you've got these second two here, the GPS and the camera in one. Pictures, I'm going to talk a lot about pictures. Pictures are a really good way to demonstrate your activity. They're not the only thing you should have, but you should have pictures. If nothing else, you should have good pictures of what you're doing, because it's hard to argue with a picture. Maps are really helpful. We do maps for every property we work on. Everything we do, we've always got maps to work with. Maps quickly illustrate what and where you're doing things. makes it real easy to summarize your program for an appraisal district and for yourself. Helps you as a planning tool as well. Logbook. The logbook's great for just keeping notes, whether it's just a notepad or whether it's a more formal logbook for what you're doing. You should always be keeping notes. Tell people if you're out on the property doing something, make a note of the date, make a note of what you did. If nothing else, it'll help you remember later as you're organizing your records. Same thing with a calendar. Maybe that's how you keep your notes. That keeps the date for you, demonstrates that you're doing things throughout the year. A lot of these activities are seasonal, and so you're not going to be doing some of them all year round. You're not going to be treating for fire ants in the middle of the winter generally. They're not very active. It's not very effective. So that's a seasonal activity, but you want to indicate that you're doing it at the right time of year and doing it when it's appropriate, and that you're keeping activity going on a regular basis. Keeping things organized by year, again, so that you know what you did in any given year. You know what you did in 2016. You know what you're doing in 2017. That's useful as well for keeping things organized as you move down the line in your program. I talked about maps. This is just an example of one. You can quickly see this landowner's got activity spread throughout their property. You can see that they're meeting the requirements. You've got brush management in the green areas there. That's where brush management was done. Have those yellow dots. Those are nest boxes. Got feeder locations on here, water locations. So, those are the types of things I can see quickly if I'm an appraiser. This landowner's meeting the requirements. I know that they're doing work throughout the property, and that's a pretty good summary in and of itself. You want to keep your maps up to date. Again, by year, as you change things, as you do things, you want to make sure that map's up to date. And any new additions, any new areas you may treat, and so you know when you did them and where you were doing work. That's really essential for your planning purposes too. You don't want to go back, plan to go back to an area you just did brush management in a couple of years ago. You want to perhaps move on to other areas. So maps are a very, very useful tool for compliance and for your management. This matrix, this is one of the tools we use to quickly summarize the activities. I know it's not intended to be read right there, but that list on the far left, that long list, are all the activities available. We would indicate these are the 5, 6, 7, 8 activities that are going on, the years in which they're going to occur, notes about what they're doing, how many acres. Again, a quick way to summarize what you're doing. When we submit annual reports, when we submit documentation to appraisal district, we like to have a really solid summary. It makes it really quick and easy for them to see that the landowner's meeting their requirements. And then we're going to back that up with a lot of documentation. But we don't want them to have to go through all that documentation to verify that they're meeting the requirements. We want to be able to see that quickly. And if they want to get into more detail, they can. Again, they may be looking at hundreds of these a year, so they're not going to want to flip through 200 pages of documentation. If you can show them that you've met the requirements with a couple of simple summaries, a map, a matrix, or a log that's quick and easy to see, that's going to make it easy on them. Again, the easier it is on them, typically the less difficulty you're going to have. Again, the minimum requirements, 3 out of these 7 categories. These are 7 categories prescribed in the law, and Parks and Wildlife has developed a list of 50+ activities that qualify under these 7 activity categories, and what you have to do to meet them. Again, depending on where you are in the state, it's going to vary a little bit. And I'm going to go through some of these and give you some examples of types of records, types of activities that we're talking about here. And if you remember nothing else today, just remember that if you're going to do it, if you're going to do a wildlife management activity, record it. Don't forget that. That's the most important thing here. That's what this webinar is all about. Habitat control is the first category. This is most of the activities in here really are focused on improving or maintaining good quality habitat for wildlife. If you're in certain parts of the state, the Edwards Plateau, Cross Timbers, Rolling Plains, parts of South Texas, we got a lot of deer in parts of Texas, particularly in the Edwards Plateau, but in some of those other areas too. And keeping those populations in balance with the habitat is essential, not just for raising good deer, but also for keeping quality habitat for other wildlife, whether it's game or non-game. So game population management can be an excellent activity. It's a habitat control activity. And the types of records you keep for that are also records that we'll talk about later in other categories. So things like harvest records. What deer did you harvest? What kind of condition were they in? Antler growth, those sorts of things. Things that you're going to be doing for maybe your census activity, but it's also going to contribute to demonstrating that you're doing good population management, which is an activity in its own right. If you're in the Managed Lands Deer Permit Program, you're already doing this. To be in MLDP, you've got to be keeping harvest records anyway, and so and the whole point of that is population management. So you've already met this requirement if you're in MLD. So the records you're keeping for that are gonna work just fine for your wildlife management evaluation too. Brush management's a common one. Lots of folks doing brush management, whether it's cedar or juniper here in the hill country, whether it's mesquite, Wasatch in South Texas, Yopon or eastern red cedar out in East Texas. Brush management is an excellent activity, and that's one where it's really visual, or can be really visual. If you're doing intensive, removing big stuff, grubbing big mesquite, hydrax and cedar, doing things like that, that's something that's really visual, and a picture tells you a lot. But you may be doing small maintenance brush management, maybe clipping little regrowth cedar or spraying small, 1 foot high mesquite. So that's not very visual. It's not something you can demonstrate in a picture very well. So you want to keep records of a map of where you treated and how did you treat it. If you're spraying mesquite, what did you use? How big an area did you treat? That's where that GPS comes in handy. You can calculate area from that GPS and get an idea of the acreage, make sure you're meeting the intensity requirement. Riparian management is one of those that excellent activity. This may involve fencing out riparian areas so you can control grazing better. This may involve riparian restoration, those sorts of things. So these can be big projects. That's actually a 10-year activity because it's a big project, a long-term project. And, that's going to be something that may be pictures, it may be grazing records, when you're grazing or the fact that you're not grazing in those areas. And so that one's, the types of records there will depend on the specifics of the activity. You want to be able to show that you did it. This is a good example. Before and after pictures are great. That after picture in this case clearly shows something was done, but that before picture tells me really what kind of an impact I had. And so in that case, here we're sharing cedar, and I can clearly see that I had quite an impact, and I can come back to this in several years, take a look at this after area, and see what kind of results I got too. So it's contributing to my management as well as my record keeping for compliance purposes. Harvest records. Again, if you're doing game population management, keep those harvest records. How many deer did you shoot? Sex, antler characteristics, body weight, good dress body weight, those sorts of things, maybe lactation status. The detail will depend on what your management goals are, but you want to keep some kind of harvest records if you're trying to qualify that as an activity. You don't have to take a picture of every animal you shoot. Some people do, but that's not necessary. But you do want to at least have that log for everything that you harvest off the property, so you can have a record of that. I mentioned before and after photos, a calendar. Again, that brush management, I might take that before and after photo. I'm going to have on my calendar the date that I did it. If I paid someone else to do that, I paid a contractor to come in and do that shearing, I want to have that receipt as backup so I can demonstrate that it was done. That gives me the year and the timing and all that as well. Make sure if receipts, particularly receipts for things like feed, if it's not clear what you bought, you might want to make some notes on the receipt as to what it was and what it went towards. I've seen some receipts that don't give a lot of detail, and so when an appraiser looks at it, they don't really know what it's for. They just know you spend some money at Triple S feed, but they don't necessarily know what it was for. So you might want to make some notes if it's not clear on that receipt. Maps are always good, and particularly for your management goals, meeting your management goals, you may make a short description of what you did, how it fit into your plan, how the wildlife benefited. You want to keep track of that. That's as much for your purposes going forward, so you can look back and see if you're having the impacts you want to have. But that's good information for the appraisal district too. It shows that interest in being successful. Again, success isn't a requirement, but you want to be successful, and so that can help you keep track of your success and the results you're having. So you can make adjustments if you need to, if something's not working out the way you thought it would. Erosion control is the second category. These are all tenure activities. They tend to be big projects, tend to be expensive projects. And what I mean by tenure activity is when you do this, you don't need to go build a new pond every year in order to keep qualifying for that activity. You build one, it counts for 10 years. But in addition to having those records from the construction, obviously you're going to have receipts. If you're doing it yourself, you got your own equipment, you may have receipts from the expenses for the equipment. If you hired someone, which is probably more likely, you're going to have a receipt from the work that was done, what was done. And that's good for the initial installation. But you want to keep those maintenance records as well. If that picture on the right there, you can see you have some spillway erosion. That's certainly something you'd want to address, want to repair. That repair, that maintenance is part of that activity too. So you want to do it to keep your pond in shape, but you also want to make sure you record that. Sometimes people forget that the maintenance is a good record as well. That shows that ongoing effort, ongoing activity. So you want to keep good records of that maintenance. Any maintenance that you do, maybe you have to just reseed the dam, a part of the dam to keep erosion down. Maybe you're doing a major repair like the spillway repair here. But definitely keep those maintenance records in addition to that initial construction. Predator control. This can be as simple as, how many predators did you take? How many hogs did you kill? How many did you trap? How many raccoons did you trap or kill? That can be fairly simple. But how many acres of fire ant treatment did you do? But you also really want to keep maps of where you're doing that activity. That can be useful for you. It may demonstrate where you're having success. Also makes it simple for an appraiser to see where you're doing those activities, where those hog traps are. And more importantly, what a lot of people don't think about is keeping records of effort. I don't know about you. I like to hunt hogs and trap hogs, but I'm not successful every time I go out. But you want to keep records of that effort. If you're out there, if you've got that trap running, that's effort. Whether it's successful that round or not, then you still made the effort. You still were active in that practice. So keep records of the effort. How many nights did you have that trap running and active? If it's closed and it's not capable, of trapping anything, that's different. Just sitting there is not being active. But if it's actively running, you're trying to catch pigs, that's effort, that's activity. You want to keep a record of that. So keep those kinds of records in addition to just, you may actually only trap a handful of pigs in a year, but maybe you had that trap open, 2 weekends a month throughout the year. Well, that's a lot more effort than is demonstrated by, 3 or 4 pictures of pigs. So keep records of that effort, keep records of the time you spend doing that stuff, in addition to just your success. This is a quote from our products and services manager, Steve Parker, and this is how we think about things, and it's useful for you to think about things as well. If we go out and do something for a landowner, if we don't have a record of it, it's like we didn't do it. There's no point to it if we can't document what we do, and so we keep exceptionally good records for that reason. We've got a duty to the landowner to demonstrate what we did and where we did it and when we did it. You should treat it the same way. You may not keep quite as detailed records as we do, but you want to act like that record is the activity. As far as the appraiser is concerned, that may be the activity in and of itself. So be sure to keep those records whenever you're out there doing something. Hog traps, this is an example where a picture is worth 1,000 words. here's success, here's effort, all in one picture, quick and easy and simple, and demonstrates that you're meeting that requirement. Supplemental food, there's a lot of, and again, these aren't all the activities in these categories. These are just some highlights. Most of these categories have at least 7 or 8 different things in them. But these are some kind of common ones and highlights to demonstrate different types of records. So grazing management can also be a habitat control activity, but it falls under supplemental food as well, depending on where you might need the activity. And that's an example of a different kind of record. So you'd want to keep schedules of rotation. As you're moving livestock through the property, if you're keeping a handful for grazing purposes or a little bit of income, then as you're rotating them through the property, keep records of when they're in each pasture. If you're leasing, maybe seasonally, maybe you're leasing for a seasonal stock or operation, keep a record of when the cows are there, when they're off. That's the demonstration of your activity. You can certainly have pictures of it, but what's better is showing where they are and when. So a little different kind of record keeping for that activity. For food plots, obviously pictures work there as well. You can show that you disked and you planted a food plot. You can show if anything was growing, but a seed list so you know what you planted, and trying to get some idea of whether or not it was successful. Again, whether it's successful or not doesn't matter as far as the qualifying the activity goes. It does matter for your management. You don't want to spend time and money planting a food plot if it's not working. So keeping that seed list, knowing what you planted, and how it worked is important there as well. Feeders are a common one, probably one of the most common activities. We love to feed wildlife, and so that's a really common activity for landowners and wildlife management and in general. And obviously you want to have pictures of your feeders, but you also want to keep records of that maintenance. Again, that maintenance is the activity. So when did you fill it? What did you put in it? Is it getting used? Those types of things. And obviously receipts for feed, but much more valuable than receipts for feed are those records of maintaining those feeders. That shows that you actually put it out on the ground and the wildlife are using it. So, and again, here's where I'm going to show you several game camera photos, because game cameras do double duty for you. Game cameras are doing the work of documenting the activity in a couple of different ways. This one shows I've got a feeder on the property. It shows that obviously it's got feed in it because they're using it, so I'm maintaining it. And all I had to do is set the camera up and let it run. So game camera photos can be a really helpful way to kind of automate some of your record keeping. And we'll have several examples of that in here, but those are very, very useful. Those automatic cameras are very useful for documenting some activities and wildlife use. They're also a lot of fun to look at. We'll talk briefly about disking because it's a little different type of activity in the way you keep records and the reason for keeping good records. In general, disking is something we recommend a lot, especially where you've got a lot of non-native grasses, Bermuda grass, king ranch blue stem, maybe buffalo grass in South Texas, just to break up the soil, break up that dense non-native vegetation and try to encourage weeds. Wildlife managers love weeds. Weeds are food for wildlife. They attract insects, which are food for other wildlife. You got to have weeds. You don't want a solid stand and nothing but grass out there. You want weeds in there as well. And I use that term loosely, but because they're not weeds to us if we're trying to encourage them. But disking is a good way to do that, especially where you've got non-native grasses. But disking is one of those things where as soon as you do it, it starts to go away. So this is a good example. This area, this little strip might have been disked. Right now, it's pretty obvious. You can see where the old growth, that KR is on the left and right, that brownish grass. You can see where the disc went. You can see where those wildflowers are coming up from that disturbance. And but 6 months from now, it's not going to be very obvious anymore. And so if an appraiser comes out in October, that disc area may not look like a disc area. If I've got a picture, I can quickly demonstrate that I did it without having to explain that, well, you just can't see it anymore. And that's true for a couple of activities, and so that's why that's where pictures really are almost essential is in cases where the evidence of the activity goes away. They can always see your feeder, they can always see your nest box, but they can't always see the result of some of these habitat manipulation techniques. Supplemental shelter, again, this is an activity that's really popular, really common, and things like nest boxes they're nice because they're tangible. An appraiser can see them, can take a picture of them themselves if they want to, but you should have your own records of those nest boxes. You want to have maps of where they are, if nothing else, so you can find them again. That's where GPS really comes in handy. And pictures of each nest box. But again, it's about keeping records and monitoring too. When you go out there to clean them out and make sure they're in working condition and make sure they don't need to be replaced, then you've got that monitoring record too. That's part of it. So you put them up, maybe you put them up 3 or 4 years ago, and if you don't have any records that you've been checking on them, well, then you're not getting that credit. That activity is not going to count for anymore if the appraiser comes asking. You can show them you've got them. But some appraisers, especially the ones who've been doing this longer, more familiar with wildlife, they're going to be expecting some records of maintenance as well. So keep those monitoring records in addition to just knowing that you've got your nest boxes out there. Brush piles and slash. Brush piles, obviously, take a picture. You've got evidence that it's there, a map of location. The slash retention on the right. So this is an area that was hydroax. And in a year or so, when that grass comes back really strong in this area, that mulch isn't going to be really obvious in the picture. So having a picture when it's done is important, so you can demonstrate what it looked like before, and it'll give you a good baseline for showing how the area recovers and what kind of results you're getting for your effort there. Strip mowing's another one of those where, just like disking, where in a few months it may not be visible anymore. And so having pictures when it's done is really essential. In addition to having maps of where you did it and dates that you did it, because timing is really important on something like strip mowing. You don't want to mow at the wrong time of year. You want to make sure you're mowing at the right time, and that's going to depend on your goals a little bit. But the timing is important. So having records of the dates and pictures that demonstrate that it was done make it easy for an appraiser to say, yeah, clearly you're doing that activity. Nest boxes, pictures of wildlife using the things you put out there are really nice to see. It encourages you. I know appraisers like to see that as well. It's always fun to look at pictures of animals. So photos of owls in your owl shacks, photos of active nests in your nest boxes. Those are good for you to see. Again, it demonstrates some success. It just adds a little bit of whipped cream on top of the sundae. So nice to see and good for you to track your success as well. So brush piles, I include this picture to talk about brush piles. The picture here obviously demonstrates that activity, but there's something else that demonstrates here too. This is another one of those where it's demonstrating achieving some goals. So we often recommend brush piles not only for shelter for wildlife, but shelter for other plants. We talked about deer, excessive deer numbers, putting a lot of pressure on habitat. If you got too many deer, you know what I'm talking about. They eat a little bit of everything, and they can really impact the habitat. And so brush piles can protect desirable young trees and shrubs from that pressure, that browsing pressure from deer, whether it's white-tailed deer or exotics. It can protect them. And so this picture demonstrates that brush piles were put in place, but you can also see that fresh green growth coming up here in this brush pile. So you got good-sized trees in the back. These are desirable trees and shrubs that are popping up in this brush pile because they're protected. You don't see a lot of shrub cover outside the brush pile in places out here. So that's just some weesatch out there in the open, but you got some good quality shrubs and trees growing up in this brush pile. So that's all good stuff. That's all good demonstration of the activity and of the results. This is another one I just like to talk about because I really like this activity a lot. It's another one where Pictures do a good job, but you want, from a management perspective, you want to have a map as well. You want to be able to see where you've done this activity so you know where you need to go next in your management. Half cutting something, it takes advantage of a plant that, the characteristics of the plant that often frustrate us. It's a tough plant to kill. It's aggressive. It's vigorous. But we can use mesquite to our advantage in wildlife management, and this is a great way to do it. It's often, because it's a colonizer, it likes to invade old fields. It's often the first thing and the only thing that may pop up out there, but you can use it to create that low cover that things like quail and rabbits and even a lot of songbirds want to utilize. This is a living brush pile, essentially, and you're basically just cutting part of the way through those stems and then folding them down, and they'll keep living and growing out a little bit, but they'll stay alive for a while and create that low cover and protect other plants. You'll start to see eventually other plants pop up inside that mesquite because mesquites fix nitrogen, so they're good nurse plants for other things. And if you can keep the deer off of those young plants, and they'll start to grow up and provide permanent or more resilient cover and food for wildlife. So really like half cut and really like it as an activity. It's a fairly easy activity, low intensity to implement as well. So that's a good one. If you got some mesquite, medium-sized mesquites, especially in an open pasture, old open pasture, it's a really good activity and an easy one to demonstrate with some simple pictures as well. So I'll get this to, there we go. Supplemental water, this may be your troughs, this may be rainwater collectors like on the right, and obviously a picture of those is going to be essential. You want to have a photo that demonstrates that it's there, a map of where they are, but again, the maintenance is important as well. When you go out to check on that trough, make sure the float's not busted or it's not empty because it's got a crack. That's part of the maintenance. That's a record you want to keep. You have the date, August 31st, checked, water source number 1, all's functioning well. That's records of your activity, and it's important. Most people don't think about keeping records when there's nothing to note other than it's working. But that can be important and simple and easy. If you do it as you go, it's really easy to do, and that'll make all the difference. It's hard to go back at the end of the year and think, well, when did I check on that? Did I have any issues with it? You'll probably remember if you had to replace a float or had to replace a water line because it's a lot of work. But if everything was working well, you may not remember that you checked on it 5 or 6 times throughout the year. So just making those notes on those calendars, notes on that logbook, the picture, that's the kind of stuff that'll make it really easy at the end of the year to have everything ready to go if you get asked for it. And again, this picture on the left is a good example of how game cameras can serve double duty for you. This little red-tailed hawk came to this water trough, and I've got evidence that wildlife are using it. I've got evidence that it was working. You can clearly see the water in there. And and I've got the start or part of a census activity using those game cameras. So it does a lot for me with just a simple remote camera in operation. Spring development's a little different. That's an activity where you may be cleaning out. If the spring's silted in, you may be cleaning that out so you can get some surface water there. You may be fencing it off from livestock use or from exotic or white-tailed deer just to keep them from pounding it down into nothing. That's the kind of activity where you can have records, depending on what you're doing, pictures maybe, or records of what you've been doing, just detailed records of, clean silt out in January and pictures of the water that's there after the fact. So. Again, depends on the specifics of what you're doing, but your plan, if you've got a good plan, it should tell you what kinds of records to keep for each of those activities. Census counts are a popular one. Obviously, if you're doing game population management, you should have some sort of census activity going on. You need to know how many deer you've got in order to know how many you need to harvest to keep things in balance. You may be doing spotlight surveys. You're going to have some data from that. That's your record of that activity. You may have a report with recommendations. That's a demonstration of the activity, so that's your record of that activity. and you don't necessarily need to take pictures the whole time you're doing the spotlight survey, but that report and those recommendations are going to be that record. Obviously, harvest data collection, again, I mentioned that with game population management, but that's part of the census activity as well. So that one's doing a little bit of double duty for you. If you're a birder and you like to keep records of, maybe you're keeping a list of birds you see on your property, and doing that regularly, that's a good record there. Just having that list, what you saw, when you saw it, that's a good record keeping. But maybe you have a more formal survey, and again, a report's going to serve the record keeping purposes of that activity. The important thing about particularly the deer surveys, remote camera surveys, is that you're getting something out of them, not just showing pictures of deer, but making some recommendations based off that. If you're doing it yourself, how many deer do I think I have? How many bucks do I think I have? How many am I going to harvest to keep things in balance? How many does am I going to harvest? So the results of that activity are important, not just the pictures. When we're talking about a census activity, it's usually got some goal associated with it. Camera surveys don't have to just be for deer. I've talked about remote camera photos a lot. You may just set a camera up on one of your water sources or on a particularly high use area of your property just to see what comes by. You never know what's going to come by water, especially in the hot, dry summer. We get some really interesting pictures from water sources, and so those are really good way to document, and it can also, if you do it right, can also qualify as an activity in its own right. Again, this one's demonstrating I've got a water source, and I may be using it for a census activity as well. I talked about deer surveys already, a little bit, hit most of this, again, if you're doing managed lands deer permits, MLDP, then you're already doing a lot of this stuff. You're probably doing some sort of census, you're doing game population management, and so you're already qualifying for some activities just from doing MLDP. MLDP has changed quite a bit this year. Starting this year, it's quite a bit different, so that's a whole nother webinar. We've actually got one archived on our website if you want to do that, if you're not aware of the changes, and makes it a little bit easier for more people to use MLDP. But again, whole other topic, but still can apply. The work that you're doing for MLDP can apply to your wildlife management evaluation, and you're already having to keep records for it anyway. So when you're out there and you're doing something and you got it done, just think, how good is my memory? How well am I going to remember this 6, 7, 8, 12 months from now? Hopefully that'll remind you to make a note, keep a record of it, take a picture, make a note in that logbook, because we all forget stuff, especially as we get busy doing other things and more important things come about. We're going to forget what we did, several months ago. Some of us maybe even sooner than that. So keep those records so you don't have to rely on your memory so much. Photos, we've talked a lot about photos. The reason is because that's a simple and easy way to demonstrate a lot of different activities. A common thing we see is folks they've got a picture of their feeders, but maybe it's 3 or 4 or 5 years old, and they say, well, I've got the same feeders, why do I need another picture? Again, think about it from an appraiser's standpoint. They may have a 5-year-old picture. One, it looks pretty bad to send in a report for 2017, and the photo you have is from 2010. But think about it from their perspective. They don't know if that feeder's still out there. They don't know if the hogs have destroyed it. They don't know if it's being maintained. So having pictures each year can make it real easy on them, so they don't have to question whether or not those feeders are still in operation. Same thing with your water sources and your shelter activities. Demonstrate that you're doing them each year. These are annual activities. So a 5-year-old picture may not be good enough evidence for you. And it's easy to take pictures now, simple and easy. Get good quality photos. That's not really much of an issue anymore. Even your most basic smartphone's got a good camera on it now. Several years ago, we'd have some issue with some kind of low quality photos. Make sure they're in focus. Make sure that what it's supposed to be demonstrating is obvious. And if it's not, then make some notes with that photo. That's what we do with all our photos. We've got notes explaining what it's supposed to be. It may make perfect sense to you because you did it and you know what it was supposed to be, but the appraiser may not. And again, they're looking at maybe dozens, sometimes hundreds of these a year. So the more you can explain simply, then the easier it's going to be for them. Be sure to get photos of things that may disappear over time, like mowing, disking, brush management. Those things may not be obvious even in the near future, and so make sure you get photos of those. And keep them organized. You don't want to just send a lump of 50 photos with your report to the appraisal district. You want to, again, make it easy on them. If you do it as you go, it's not difficult to do, but these are my supplemental shelter photos. These are my supplemental feed photos. These are my game camera photos. Keep it nice and easy for them. Keep it organized by year and by activity, and that'll make your report nice and neat and easy to read. And again, those game camera photos are very valuable for you. Game cameras are inexpensive now. You can find good quality ones when they're on sale for less than $100. So that's a really important tool to have for record keeping. These are some of the common things that we see with landowners when we're doing annual reports for them. And folks, we do about 600 of these a year for landowners, so we've seen a little bit of everything, some excellent reports that go well above and beyond what's necessary, and some that are just really hard to demonstrate that the activities were done. So, but these are some common ones, not just with the documentation, but kind of what you might run into with an appraisal district. Some appraisal districts don't ask for an annual report at all, and that can make you feel, confident in that. Well, they're not going to bother with me. It's not a problem. But again, we've seen that change. Even in a single year, it can change very quickly. New appraiser comes in, and all of a sudden they want to know what you did last year. Well, if you have an annual report already, you don't need to worry about it. You just hand them the annual report you did. It's not a big deal. If you have to go back and manufacture that stuff after the fact, it can be quite difficult and quite a lot of work. And when we've done that many times, worked with landowners to do that, and it's a whole lot of work to go back and try to gather all that stuff up. So save yourself the trouble and do it as you go. Some appraisal districts may have a custom report form. Parks and Wildlife has a prescribed annual report form. It applies across the state, the same one in any county in the state. If you're in wildlife management, you can use that annual report form. That's the one we always use because it applies everywhere. If they want a custom form, it's always a good idea to humor and fill that out. Nothing wrong with that, but we recommend you do that standard form as well. It's got a little more detail usually than the appraisal district's form, so it'll help you keep better records. If you've already got the Parks and Wildlife form filled out, most of the appraisal district custom forms are simple to transcribe that information over to. Receipts, the caution on receipts is that, again, make sure that it's obvious what they're for. I've seen people send receipts with a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't have anything to do with their wildlife, and maybe one little line item that relates to their wildlife management activity. Make sure you indicate what you're trying to say with that receipt. Some appraisal districts don't like receipts at all. They don't want to look through a stack of receipts and especially not, copied versions of receipts that are hard to read. But they're good to have as backup if you need them. Just like with your income taxes, you got those. You're not submitting receipts to the IRS, but you got them if you ever need them for whatever reason. So keep them filed. If it's a big item, pond construction, major brush management, something you spend a lot of money on, a receipt can be useful to demonstrate that. But a receipt for every bag of feed you buy, I'd have it handy, but not necessarily. You don't necessarily have to send all those in unless they ask specifically for receipts. Some appraisal districts ask specifically for those receipts. So again, that's about knowing what your appraisal district wants to see in the annual report. And I like for expenses, if you like keeping expenses, just a list of expenses that are specific to your activities is nice. You can even organize those by activity. And that way you can see, what you're spending on each of those activities as well. And it's easy to demonstrate the effort you put into each activity that way. Be sure to keep documentation of that maintenance. That's I know I've talked about that a lot, but that's really important. Just having that feeder out there, having that nest box out there, that's fine, but you need to show that you're maintaining it. This is all about activity, being activity based. It's the same thing with livestock. It's easy to demonstrate you have livestock on the property, but there's maintenance with livestock. Obviously, there's maintenance with any agricultural enterprise, and if there's ever any question about what you're doing, and again, I've dealt with a lot of ag operations as well, where they've had questions from appraisal districts about whether they're meeting the requirements. That documentation, that maintenance documentation, feed expenses, maintenance, pasture maintenance expenses, fence maintenance, that sort of thing. That can make it a lot easier to get things smoothed out if there's any question from the appraisal district. And try to keep it limited to things that are actually part of your wildlife management activity. I mentioned that with the receipts a little bit. And I'll tell you this, if you're doing something and you think it might qualify, then by all means keep a record of it. But we do spend, a fair amount of time weeding out some things that may not be applicable to the landowner's plan, or may just not be a qualifying activity. Maybe it was unclear. If we've got the documentation, we can quickly say, yeah, that's good, but it's not necessarily, it doesn't apply to this activity. It may be if you repaired your barbed wire fence in your wildlife management, that's not necessarily something that applies to a wildlife activity unless it's part of your grazing management operation. But if you're just fixing your fence because you had somebody drive through it on the road, that's not necessarily part of your wildlife management activity. So you wouldn't want to include that in your report. If you mowed a path to walk somewhere, that's not necessarily something that qualifies as a wildlife activity. So it's not something you'd include in your report. But if you're unsure, always keep a record. But when you're going to if you have to submit things to the appraisal district, try to only include things that are applicable to those wildlife activities. It gives them less to look through, and it makes it easier on them. Quick summary, which is good because I'm about out of my time here, though I'm happy to stay and answer any questions you have as long as you want to do it. Record keeping is important, obviously. If you do it right as you go, then it'll really reduce the stress and worry about an appraisal district asking you. And again, that's important for ag or wildlife. It's no different for ag. In our mind, we see problems on both sides, not just with folks who have kept poor wildlife records, but folks who've kept poor ag records. So keep your records, whether you're in wildlife or whether you're raising livestock or growing crops. Do keep your records. You'll get more out of your wildlife management too. Again, this isn't just about compliance. It's about being able to see if you're having the effect you want and meeting your goals. Doesn't have to be a lot of work if you do it as you go. This is maybe a helpful way to think about it. If you're doing things yourself, maybe you're handling everything yourself, all your activities yourself, think about it as if someone else is paying you to do it. You're getting quite a tax incentive to do this stuff. And so think about it. If someone was paying you, how well would you keep those records? I mentioned that quote from Steve. If we didn't record it, then we didn't do anything. So think about it from that perspective. If it helps you, encourage you to keep good records. You almost certainly will be asked at some point by an appraisal district. There are exceptions to that, but at some point, even those really relaxed appraisal districts are going to change staff, and you never know what you're going to get asked at that point. So, and that's true again of wildlife or agricultural use. I've seen it go on both sides of that. So if you're keeping good records, you got to prepare that annual report every year, whether they ask for it or not. You got it ready to go. Keep your plan up to date. That can really make the difference for you. And it's not so hard if you do it as you go. We've got plenty of examples of that, plenty of landowners that demonstrate that very, very well. So that, I'll thank you again for joining us today. Thanks to Clint for letting us be a part of this. And I am happy to answer any and all questions you might have.
All right. Thank you, Shane. So far, scroll up, make sure I didn't miss anything. So far, they're going to let you off easy questions. We did have one question that was posted up about being able to view this, the slides and whatnot going forward. They will be posted on our website and YouTube. And so if you follow that link that I posted up in the chat window, you'll be able to find this webinar. Give me a week or so to get it posted up. I'd also like to remind everybody, if you will fill out the post-event survey, that'll pop up in a pop-up window when you close this. When you close the webinar, you'll be entered into a drawing to win a Yeti cooler and a dove hunt for the 2018 season at Paloma Pechanga in Hondo. We post one more link for you here. This link is a link to the webinar page on our website. You'll be able to find the next schedule, the schedule of the next events and the rest of them for the year 2017. Had one or a couple questions that popped up. Can mowing pastures be considered part of my plan?
Yeah, absolutely. That's so particularly in properties with old hay pastures and sometimes even if you're going to continue to use them for hay, you can make some minor adjustments and still qualify it. But old hay pastures, old improved pastures, things like that, mowing, shredding can be a really good activity. How you do it and when you do it becomes important. So you're not going to be mowing it, every month and keeping it short necessarily. From a wildlife perspective, that's not what you want. But typically, what we talk about strip mowing. So that's typically how we think about that. What you're trying to do is increase diversity. So by mowing in strips. So maybe you mow 1 out of every 3 strips, mow 1, leave 2, mow 1. That gets you about a third of the area cut at any one time. And what that'll do is gives you a different structure. It gives you some short areas where animals can feed. It gives them leaves some cover for them nearby so they can escape from predators, maybe flying over. And it also can encourage some of those weeds to come up as well. If you're not mowing too often, then those weeds can pop up in those mowed areas. Timing is really important. Typically, in most cases, we're looking at late summer, late July through August is a good time to mow. And in the winter, November through February is a really good time to mow because it opens things up for those spring wildflowers. That can make for a nice view for you, and also those spring wildflowers are good for a lot of our pollinators. So the timing is really important, how often you do it, but your plan should specify when and how to do that. But absolutely is a good activity to qualify with.
Okay, do seasonal creeks count as riparian areas?
Yeah, they certainly can. It'll depend some on how seasonal, what you mean, but they certainly can. I've used riparian management in seasonal streams all the time. As you get, it's really case by case. As you get farther up, you get into something that's more ephemeral. Really only flows, for a day or two after a rain. That may be questionable, but it would depend on kind of the structure and what you've got there and what you're doing to it. Sometimes good riparian management can result in more and longer water. So absolutely could. Any riparian area you want to treat with a little extra care. And I'll mention now, I'm going to be talking about that next week actually. And our webinar you can view that one, or our webinar will be posted after that as well. We'll be talking about riparian management next week. So you're welcome to join me for that if you want to learn more about it. But do treat those riparian areas with extra care.
Okay, when is the best time to disc in strips?
Disking's another one of those where winter's a really great time. When you disc that'll dictate what kind of results you get. So sometimes you have to play with it a little bit to see what response you get. But generally we're looking at sometime between November and February. Disking earlier in the winter, November time, November, December, is going to give you different plants than if you disc later in the winter, say January, February. And so you want to adjust that to your goals. Later disking may get you more in the way of sunflowers. Earlier disking may get you more in the way of those early spring forbs. So So you want to play with it a little bit and to get the right response, but winter's usually the best time. You can do a little discing in that late summer time frame too, but generally I'm recommending that during the winter months.
All righty, I think that covers all of them.
I think there's one more at the end that just popped up.
Okay. Is there a good example of a good record book for wildlife?
So we've got the one I showed you there. That's our version of it. Other than that, one that's just available anywhere, I'm not aware of any. A lot of folks just use a notepad or just a calendar book, an appointment calendar like you'd use. And that's essentially ours. It's really just a calendar with some room for extra notes. So it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Make a note of what the activity was and when you did it and what you did. It can be really simple. It doesn't have to be anything too terribly complex. If you're taking notes, that's the hardest part and the best step you can take. So. Yeah. Did you see that last one, Clint? Where'd it go?
Did I miss one?
It's at the bottom of the chat window I've got. Maybe you just, I don't know, it's tall. You missed it. I can read it out if you want.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, see, I was told I should send in my report for the year in December, and the appraisal district would not send a reminder. The report should be requested and not till after January 1st, correct? So that's a really good question. The requirements for the annual report, so the rules don't specify when an annual report should or can be requested. It just says that appraisal districts can request an annual report and require you to send one in. Same thing, that's true of ag too. They can ask you for your proof of your ag operation at any time. Wildlife just has this, they call it an annual report in wildlife, and it's specified in the rules. So some appraisal districts do ask late in the year. Hayes is another good example of that. They typically do inspections and they'll ask for reports starting in August or September. Obviously, you may not be done with everything, but you want to report on what you've done there. Most appraisal districts will ask for the report before the following April 30th. The reason that is that's when the applications are due, so they're kind of on that same schedule for applications at April 30th deadline. That's typical, but it's not. There's nothing in the rules that says they have to do that. So they can ask. Now you can always, if they ask for it, say in December, and you didn't get it in, you'd obviously have the opportunity the next year to get something in and work with them to get that documentation in place. But if they're going to give you a deadline, it's best to meet it. Some of them give deadlines just to get people moving. We've seen that. We've seen appraisal districts that they set a deadline, but it's kind of a soft deadline. They really just don't want people waiting until the end of April to send everything in. So they may start asking in January, though you've really got more time. Again, it's about knowing the specific requirements of your appraisal district. To answer the first part of the question, yeah, technically, if they don't send you a letter asking for it, they can't really hold you to sending it in. There are appraisal districts, there are more than one, that simply expect you to send them in. So we've got a list of those that we know that's what they expect. Most of them don't enforce that very strictly, but they do have it stated. They may have it stated in their wildlife or ag guidelines that they expect an annual report, by December or whenever. And so if you're aware of that, it's best to do it. We tell folks if you know it, if you're doing the annual report anyway, it shouldn't be a big deal. Go ahead and send it to them. If you missed it because you weren't aware, because they didn't send you a letter, they can't really hold you to submitting evidence they didn't ask for. That's true of ag as well. They have to ask for it to make it something that you're really required to do. But you want to be familiar with your appraisal district, and you want to be if it's a reasonable request, you want to try to meet it. But those can be points that you can you can work with them on if you missed a deadline because you didn't get that letter from them. So that can be a tricky one with annual reports because unlike applications where there's a solid statewide deadline, April 30th before May 1st, there is no set deadline for annual reports.
All right, don't think I've missed any other ones. I appreciate you catching that one.
Yeah, you bet.
If we have any more questions, Shane's contact information is up there. You can contact Shane. You can contact me. Again, if you scroll up in the chat window, you will find the link to this webinar, or when it is posted, we'll have it up there, and you can go back and watch it and get all the information once again. So, Shane, I appreciate it once again. We always appreciate y'all's help with these webinars. They're always great. And if anyone is listening that's affected by the hurricane and all that, wish y'all the best of luck and clean up. And if we can do anything to help y'all out, please let us know.
Absolutely.
Thank you once again, and y'all have a good rest of y'all's week.
Thanks, Clint.